Please remember that the complete information for the class that you are about to view is at elithecomputerguy.com. Not only do we have our videos there, but we have part lists, diagrams, pictures, and even complete code examples. So if you are watching this video and you want more information, please go to elithecomputerguy.com. Welcome back. As you know, I am Eli, the Computer Guy, and in today's class, I'm going to be showing you how to do basic animations using CSS. So one of the cool things about CSS is that you can actually do animations just with CSS and a little bit of HTML. You do not need JavaScript. You definitely do not need Flash. Basically, just with CSS and HTML, you can create a dynamic movement on your HTML document or your web application. Now, when you're going to be dealing with animations in CSS, it's important to understand there are two components. The first component is you're going to create a class. So we've been creating lots of classes over all the classes that we've been going over, and where you're going to create a class more or less like normal. But then in that class, essentially what you're going to be doing is you're going to be pointing towards an animation. So basically, you're going to be pointing towards settings that are going to change during the animation. You're going to say how long the animation should last for, and then you're going to say how many iterations the animation should run for. So that iteration thing is a very important thing to remember, because sometimes when you create the class, you point toward the animation configurations, the whole 9 yards. If you forget the iteration, it will only run once. So basically, whatever you've set up, it will only run once, and it'll stop. In the animations that I'll be showing you today, I've set the animation iteration count to infinite, so it'll keep running, and so on. So with that, let's go over to the computer so I can show you how animations work within CSS. This is pretty cool, and it's pretty easy to be able to add into your HTML documents. And again, to be clear, this is not using JavaScript or any other coding language. This is just pure CSS and HTML. So here we are at my demonstration machine. Again, I am using a MacBook, so I use TextEdit to write these two files, but all you need for CSS and HTML is a basic ASCII text editor. So if you are in the Windows world, you can use Notepad. In the Mac world, obviously TextEdit. If you're in the Linux world, you can use Nano, Vim, gedit, whatever you like. So before I actually show you the code here, the CSS and the HTML, let's actually go over and see the demonstration so you have an idea of what we're going to be coding for. And so basically here we have 3 examples of animation. So with these examples, essentially up here, this top example, I am showing you how you can change the border radius to basically turn a square into a circle. So basically what I did here is I created a div, I gave it a border that I think it's 5 pixels black, so you have that border there, and then all I'm doing for this particular animation is I'm simply going from a border radius of 0% to a border radius of 50%, and so that is turning a square into a circle, and this is all being done with CSS. Now at the bottom here, what I've done is I've created what are called keyframes. I'll show you that in a second. I've done the keyframes, but then I've actually created 2 different classes, and with those 2 different classes, what I've done is I've modified the color of the square that's bouncing, and I've modified how long the animation should take to run. So when you're dealing with keyframes, you go from like 0% to 25% to 50% to 100%, right? Well, what you can do is basically when you create the class, you say how long it should take that animation to run. So for this animation up here, I think I have it running for about 10 seconds, and for the animation on the bottom, I have it running for 5 seconds. So basically, this is where I'm reusing the exact same animation. I simply changed the color of the box, and I've changed how long it should take for it to actually run. Before we get to the CSS, let's go take a look at the HTML real quick. There really is almost nothing to this HTML. Again, we're going to open up the HTML, we're going to open up the head, and then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be pointing to the animation style sheet. So this is the animation style.css. So if this style sheet is in the same folder as the HTML document, you simply put the name for it. If it's in a different folder, then you would put the full file path. Then down here, literally all I've done is I've created 3 different divs. I've put in breaks in the middle just to give a little separation. And then with these divs, I am simply using different classes. So for the first, it's animation 1. So that's animation 1. For the second, it's animation 2. So this is animation 2. And then for the third, that's animation 3. So basically all I've done is I've just created these divs. I've given them different classes, and then that's what's showing up in the HTML document. So the HTML document itself is ridiculously simple. Of course, we close the body, and then we close the HTML. So what makes this animation interesting is when we get over to the CSS. So let's go take a look at that. So here, I've actually written everything out. Oops. Tab that there so it looks a little bit better to give you an idea of how this works. So this is all the information that's needed for animation 1. So when I'm talking about animation 1, I'm talking about this animation right here. And so this is all the information that's needed for animation 1. So what we're doing here is we're creating a class for the animation, and then we're creating the keyframes, and we're giving those keyframes a name. And so basically this is how the animation should run. So what I do for the class, so I'm creating a class more or less how I normally create a class. So what I'm doing is I'm setting the width to 200 pixels. So it's going to be 200 pixels wide. I'm setting the height to 200 pixels. So it's 200 pixels tall. And then what I'm doing is I'm creating a border. I'm setting that border to 5 pixels. I'm setting that border to be solid, and I'm setting it to be black, right? So basically this right here is what gives me a 200 pixel by 200 pixel square. Then we get down to the animation component. So here, what we're then going to say is with this, we're going to have an animation, and we're going to call the name of that animation. So this is shapeshift, and so I have at keyframes here, and this is called shapeshift. So this is going to call this animation that we've created. We're then going to say animation hyphen duration. So how long should this animation take? So to go from the square to the circle for this, how long? Basically, how long is that? So we're going to say this entire animation should run for 5 seconds. So it is important to understand that the duration is dealt with here, not in the keyframe area. So if I wanted to set this to, I don't know, like 10 seconds to make this slower, I do File, I do Save, then I go here, I refresh, and now we can see that's running a lot slower. So it is important to understand that the length of the animation is actually set within the class, not down here with the keyframes. Then you're going to say how many times should the animation iterate through. So again, this depends on what you're doing, what your project requires. I would argue for a lot of these projects, you probably want it to be infinite. So infinite means it's going to go on infinitely. But you could set it to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever you want. So you set that there. Then we get down to the keyframes. So basically with the keyframes, what you're saying is what should the different frames in the animation be? And then what CSS is going to do, CSS is then going to fade from one keyframe to the other. So with this, I've given you the first example of from to. So the first thing that you can do with keyframes is simply say go from this CSS styling to this CSS styling. Don't do anything else. All right. So we do at keyframes. So we do at keyframes to create the keyframes. We give it a name. So you give it a name of whatever you want. You open up with the squiggly brackets, and then you can say from. So what we're doing here is I want to go from border radius of 0%. So border radius of 0% means it's a square. Again, do the semicolon, and then you close the squiggly brackets. So you have squiggly brackets here, right? So this is where you have 2 sets of squiggly brackets. So you have squiggly brackets for all the keyframes, and then in the from to, you also have your squiggly brackets. So you say from, and then you put whatever styling you want in here. So border radius, colon 0%, then semicolon, close the squiggly brackets, and then we're going to go to, and then we're going to say border radius, colon 50%, again, semicolon, squiggly brackets, and so 50%, that is what gets you the circle. So basically, if you have a border radius of 50%, that gives you circle. And so basically what's happening here then is this class is then calling these keyframes. These keyframes are going to go from a border radius of 0% to a border radius of 50%. You go up here, the animation duration will be for 5 seconds, and the iteration count is going to be infinite. So it keeps going, right? And so again, you could go in here, you can modify different things, like you can actually put multiple things in here. So I could say, I don't know, background hyphen color. And then we could say, let's take it from red. Colon there. So basically the background color will start as red, and then we can go here, background hyphen color, I don't know, turn it to green, let's say, and we do a semicolon here. So basically, again, you can put multiple things in here. We can do file, we can do save, then we refresh, we can see now it is going from a red square to a green circle, right? So again, you may, for whatever reason, I did a class before where I was showing you like alert animations. Like maybe you want to have an animation for an alert. Like if the temperature goes above a certain level, you want an animation to do something. So this is where, just to show you, with an animation like that, you can have multiple things happen. You can change the shape of the object you're dealing with. You can change the color of the object you're dealing with. You can change many things. So that's the first thing. So basically with this is where you can say go from this styling, whatever that styling is, to this styling, and it will simply do that in the amount of time you've given for the animation duration, and it will do that however many times you've told it with that animation iteration count. Now let's go down and let's look at the next two examples. So the interesting part about the next two examples is actually I'm reusing one keyframe set that I created. So basically this is where I want to show you that when you're creating these classes and when you point them at one of those keyframe sets, you can have other settings to basically make these classes unique. So basically what you look here is animation 2. I've created a box that is 50 pixels. I've created a background color that is red. It's pointing to the animation of here, there. The duration of that animation is 10 seconds and the iteration count is infinite, right? So basically we're going to have a red box. It's going to be animated by here, there. It is going to last for 10 seconds and it's going to keep doing that forever. The curious thing is here is we're going to go down and much of this is the same. Basically I've copy and pasted almost all of it, but for animation 3 we still have the width and height being 50 pixels, but then we're going to make the background color blue, pointing to the same animation, but then the duration for this is only going to be 5 seconds, so that's going to go a lot faster. The iteration count is obviously also going to be infinite. When I go down and I look at the keyframes, basically what I've done with the keyframes here is simply modified what the left margin or the margin left for the div should be. So that's what gives us the bouncy thing. So basically what I've said is at the 0% for the keyframes. So basically at the 0 keyframe, the first keyframe, I want the margin left to be nothing. So it'll start all the way on the left. At the 10% mark, so basically at 10% through the animation, I want the margin left to be 10%. At the 20% mark, so basically that's going to make it go to the right. And then at the 20% mark, I want to go back to the left. And then at the 30% mark, I want to go farther to the right, so it goes to 40%. And then at the 40% mark, I want it to go kind of back. And basically, it's giving that nice little bouncy thing. So think about this like with bouncy balls, or maybe if you want to animate some type of fireworks or something like that, maybe this would be useful. Then at the 50% mark, it goes to 80% all the way to the right. Then I just skip to the 90% mark. So this is one thing you can do. So maybe you want a lot of animation really quick together, and then you just want to skip a longer span of time. So at the 90% mark, then the margin left is going to be to 15. So basically here at the 50%, it's going to go way far over to the right. Then at the 90% mark, it's going to go way far to the left. And at the 100% mark, it's basically going to go off screen. It's going to go to 100%. And so what I've done here is, again, these keyframes, these are called here, there. I've referenced them in 2 animations, basically in 2 classes. And so if we take a look, now we can see that using the same keyframes, that these 2 different classes have a little bit different variation and are dealing with the keyframes separately. So the top here, so this one is red, it is going slower. The bottom one is blue, and obviously it's running through the animations a lot faster, but the animation itself is the same. So this is some example of how you can do animation using CSS. Again, the 2 main ways to do it is you can go from to. So basically all that's going to happen here is with the animation when you do from to, CSS is just going to slowly convert from whatever the initial CSS styling is to whatever the final CSS styling should be. Or you can go down, and again, you can do it based off of percentage through the animation. And so here you can do 0%, 10%, 20%, 40%, 50%, 90%, whatever else. So basically with this, you can have whatever steps you want, right? So with this up here with from to, it's simply going to go from one style to another style. This is where you can get a little bit more complicated with the animation. I mean, you can say, okay, go from this to this, 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 so on and so forth. Then the important thing to understand is then when you create the class, that's where you're going to point to the animation. So this is where you put the name. Then you're going to say how long the animation should last. And then again, what the iteration count should be. So this is the kind of thing here where basically you can take one set of keyframes, and then let's say you want to create some kind of like rain, or maybe a star field. Basically, you want to create some kind of basic patterns where you're using the same shape, more or less moving the same directions, but some you want to be faster, some you want to be slower, some you want to be different colors, possibly some you want to be different shapes. Like maybe, so here, right? So we do animation 3. Let's say border radius of 50% for this. So let's do border hyphen radius, and here we're just going to do 50% colon. So basically this is going to turn animation 3 into a circle. So I hit file, I hit save, and so if we take a look here now, I hit refresh. Now we have a blue bouncing ball versus a red square. They're both using the same keyframes, but again, this is where, you look at a web page and you have, again, that star field, that rain, snowflakes, whatever else. This is one of the ways that you can actually accomplish that without going into JavaScript or anything else. So that's basic CSS animation. As always, this is one of the things, go play with it, right? This is how you technically do it. What you actually use in the real world depends on what your situation is. So go play, have fun, see what you can do. So there you go. Now you know how to do basic animation using CSS. Again, you can go from to, so from, this is the starting point, to, this is the ending point, or you can say with the keyframes, at the 0% mark, I want this to happen, at the 50% mark, I want this to happen, at the 75% mark, I want this to happen, and at the 100% mark, this is how I want the animation to finish. Past that, remember, a lot of settings are actually in the class. So you have two components. You have the class, and then you have the keyframes. So in the class, that's where you're gonna basically set up the initial environment. Is it gonna be a square? Is it gonna be words? Is it gonna be fonts? Whatever that is, colors, that type of thing. You can actually do all of that up there. Then you will point to the animation, so you'll say what animation you want to reference, and then at that point you can say how long do you want that animation to run for, and then again how many iterations of that animation do you want to run. There are some other settings you can play around with. Again, do a little bit of research, do some Google search, go to W3 Schools. They have some good information. You can do things such as delaying animation, so you can wait a second, or you can wait a little bit before an animation starts when a page loads. And so the important thing to understand here is this is where you can start to create some really complicated, very interesting animations, especially if you're using some kind of back-end programming language. So imagine you're using a back-end programming language, and with that, you're able to pull from some kind of database. And from that database, let's say you have 100 different things. And so you have 100 different things that you want to animate, again, to, let's say, create something like a fireworks show. So if you open up a web page and you see a fireworks show, or you see confetti, or you see something like that, you can actually code a lot of that animation simply using CSS. And then you don't have to worry if the end user has a JavaScript blocker. You don't have to worry about JavaScript screwing up anything like that. You can actually have that animation run purely in CSS. So animation in CSS can be a very useful, very good thing, especially since you don't have to go into the JavaScript world. Again, I did a class before showing you how you can create alerts using a CSS animation. So basically, again, let's say if you have a temperature sensor, the temperature goes above a certain level, you can have the server basically print out in an HTML document and show you basically have something blinking so it catches your attention. So you can do things like that, or you can just do kind of fun animations using CSS. There are a lot of opportunities here. Again, it's one of those things you have to play with, and as always, sky is the limit. Basically, you can, with the animations, how you're limited simply by how much time and energy you have trying to develop whatever animation you want to develop. I'm sure you could probably, if you really wanted to try to do it, you could probably try to create a whole, little cartoon show using a CSS animation, though there's probably better ways to do it. There's probably more efficient ways to do that. But this is something you should play with. And again, I think it's one of those cool things. Like when you think about CSS, it's very easy to think about CSS and think about CSS being boring. Like, oh, ooh, fonts or ooh, colors or ooh, shapes. This is where you get to see how something that seems boring like CSS can actually start to get to be a little bit interesting. Oh, look, animations, other fancy things you can do. Oh, maybe this isn't as boring as I first thought. So anyways, some things to think about. As always, I enjoy doing this class, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. If you like the content that I create, please think about going to elithecomputerguy.com and becoming a member or donating. Please understand that all of the educational videos are in front of the paywall. That includes the videos, that includes the notes, the diagrams, and the code example. All of that is freely available and in front of the paywall. But if you want to watch opinion videos or if you want to be able to comment, you do need to become a member. Membership is $5 a month or $60 a year and gives you access to those opinion videos and the ability to comment. If you don't want to become a member, you just want to give a one-time donation, there's also a donate button where you can do that. Please understand, in order to provide the education that I am, it does cost money. Servers cost money, equipment costs money, travel costs money. All of these things cost a reasonable amount of money, and the fact of the matter is YouTube's advertising program no longer supports creators the way that it used to. So if you want these classes to continue to stick around and you find them to be valuable, please think about either becoming a monthly member or donating a few dollars for this project.